The chains bit into her wrists like the teeth of wolves. Sera had stopped feeling the cold 3 hours ago. First her feet went numb, then her hands. Then the creeping frost climbed up her arms and legs until her entire body became a thing of ice and fading memory. The blizzard howled around her like a living creature, hungry and patient, knowing that time was on its side. They had bound her to the ancient stone pillar at the edge of Ashwood territory, where the mountain wind cut sharpest and the snow fell like punishment from the gods themselves. This was the place of endings, the place where the pack sent those it wished to forget. The elders called it the Judgment Stone, though everyone knew that no judgment happened here, only execution, only the slow erasure of those deemed unworthy to breathe the same air as their betters. She was 23 winters old, and she was going to die here. The irony was not lost on her. For 16 years she had carried a gift that let her see truth in all things, and for 16 years that gift had brought her nothing but suffering. Now, chained to a pillar in the darkness, she understood the final truth of her existence. She was not dying because she was barren. She was dying because she had seen too much and spoken when she should have remained silent. The snow stung her face like needles of glass. Her thin dress, once white, had frozen stiff against her skin. Her dark hair whipped across her eyes, strands already crystallizing with ice. She could no longer feel her feet, could no longer feel her hands, could no longer feel anything except the dull ache in her chest where her heart continued to beat, despite having no reason to continue. But she did not cry out. She did not beg. What words could she offer to those who had already decided her worth? In the Ashwood Pack, an Omega existed for one purpose: to carry children, to continue bloodlines, to serve as vessels for the future of the pack. Sera had failed at this singular duty not through choice, but through the cruel mathematics of her own body. The healers had examined her at 17 and pronounced their verdict with the finality of executioners: barren, incapable, worthless. But that was not why they had chained her here. She closed her eyes against the biting wind and let the memories come, knowing they would be her last companions in this frozen darkness. She remembered being 7 years old, small and dark-haired and too quiet for a child. She remembered sitting beside her mother's bed in their small cottage at the edge of the village, watching the rise and fall of labored breathing. She remembered the coughing that came in the night, a wet sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken inside her mother's chest. And she remembered knowing, not suspecting, not fearing, knowing with a certainty that terrified her, with a clarity that felt like being struck by lightning, that her mother would not survive the winter. The knowledge had come to her like a whisper from somewhere beyond the world, clear and cold and absolute as the stars themselves. She had tried to warn them. She had pulled at her father's sleeve with desperate 7-year-old hands and told him that mother needed a healer, that something was growing inside her chest, that they needed to act now before it was too late. Her father had struck her across the face hard enough to send her sprawling. He had called her cursed, called her touched by darkness, called her a witch in miniature. The other children had learned from their parents. They threw stones at her in the village square and called her the Death Speaker. They said she had killed her own mother with her wicked words, had spoken the death into being. When her mother died 3 months later, exactly as Sera had foreseen, they blamed her for it, as if knowing about death was the same as causing it, as if the messenger was responsible for the message. She remembered being 15, working in the kitchens with her head down and her mouth shut. She had learned by then to swallow the truths that came to her unbidden, to press them down into the darkest corners of her mind where they could not escape to cause her more pain. Silence was survival. Ignorance was safety. Speaking the truth was the surest path to suffering, but some truths were too large to swallow. She had seen the beta, a man named Corwin with a friendly smile and a generous manner, stealing from the pack stores. Night after night he crept into the granary when the moon was dark and filled his pockets with coin that belonged to everyone. She saw it not with her eyes, but with something deeper, a sense that showed her the shape of lies, the way others sensed the coming of rain or the changing of seasons. She had said nothing. She had pressed her lips together and looked away and told herself that silence was survival. Corwin was important. Corwin had friends on the council. Corwin could destroy her with a word, and no one would believe a barren Omega over a respected beta. So she had stayed silent, and Corwin had continued stealing for 2 more years before he was caught by chance when a guard made an unscheduled round. By then he had taken enough to leave 3 families hungry through a hard winter. A child had died from the weakness that hunger brings. A little girl named Mira, who had always smiled at Sera when she passed. Sera carried that child's death like a stone in her chest. She had known, she had seen, and she had chosen silence because she was afraid. Mira's blood was on her hands as surely as if she had held the knife herself. Never again, she had promised herself in the darkness of her tiny room, tears streaming down her face. Never again would she let fear make her complicit in evil. Never again would she choose her own safety over the lives of innocents. That promise had brought her here, to this pillar, to these chains, to this cold that was slowly turning her blood to ice. 6 months ago, she had seen Alpha Draven meeting with strangers in the forest clearing that the pack used for secret councils. She had been gathering herbs for the healer, invisible as always, when she heard voices and crept close to listen. The men with Draven had hard eyes and harder hands, men who smelled of blood and foreign lands. She had watched from the shadows as Draven handed over maps of the territory, detailed drawings showing where the patrols ran thin and where the vulnerable settlements lay unprotected. In exchange, the strangers had given him gold, heavy pouches that clinked with the promise of wealth. The Alpha of Ashwood was selling his own people to raiders. This time, Sera had not remained silent. She had gone to the council and spoken her truth, describing what she had witnessed with the absolute certainty that her gift provided. She had expected justice. She had expected the elders to investigate, to confirm her vision, to remove a corrupt leader before more innocents suffered. Instead, Draven had smiled. He had called her a witch and a liar. He had reminded the council that she was barren, that her very existence was a mark of the goddess's displeasure, that she had been touched by darkness since childhood. He had suggested that her accusations were nothing more than the desperate attempts of a worthless Omega to gain importance through destruction. And the council, men who had known Draven since childhood, men who benefited from his leadership, men who feared what her gift might reveal about their own secrets, had believed him. Or perhaps they had simply chosen to believe him. Sera's gift showed her truth, but it had also taught her that people often preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable facts. Truth was a burden that most would rather not carry. The sentence had been pronounced with ceremonial gravity 3 days later. Sera would be given to the storm as an offering, a sacrifice to cleanse the pack of her corruption. The official reason was her barrenness, her curse, her failure to fulfill her purpose as an Omega. The real reason stood behind those words like a shadow, visible only to those willing to look. Draven wanted her dead because she knew what he was, and dead women told no tales. "May the storm take what we cannot keep," the Beta had said, as they locked the iron around her wrists. His voice had been steady, his eyes had been empty of mercy. She had looked for something human in his face, some flicker of doubt or compassion, and found nothing. The wind shifted direction, and Sera forced her eyes open against the ice that had begun to seal her lashes together. Through the white curtain of snow, she could see nothing but darkness and motion. The world had reduced itself to this small circle of suffering. The pillar at her back, the chains on her wrists, the cold that was slowly, inevitably, claiming her. She wondered if the goddess was watching. She wondered if there was any meaning to a life spent seeing truths that no one wanted to hear. She wondered if death would finally free her from the burden of knowing. The storm answered her with silence and snow and the promise of an ending. Miles away, in the frozen reaches of the northern borderlands, another soul wandered through the darkness. Kale had been walking since the night Isolde died, not continuously, of course. He still returned to his fortress when duty demanded, still sat upon his throne of black granite and ancient oak, still rendered judgments and signed decrees, and performed all the ceremonial functions that a king must perform. But every night, when the sun fell below the mountains and the world turned cold and dark, he left his chambers and walked. Through corridors that echoed with memories of laughter now silenced. Through courtyards where he had once watched his wife tend her winter roses. Through the wild lands beyond his walls, where the wind howled and the snow fell, and no one expected him to be anything but a man alone with his grief. He walked until his legs ached and his lungs burned and his mind finally, mercifully went quiet. Tonight he had traveled farther than usual. Some restless energy had driven him past the familiar paths, past the patrolled borders, into the disputed territories where the Ashwood pack claimed dominion. He knew he should turn back. A king had no business wandering alone in lands that did not belong to him. His counselors would be horrified. His guards would be frantic. But the thought of returning to his empty chambers, to the bed where Isolde had died with her hand in his, to the silence that had replaced her laughter, was more than he could bear. So he walked on, following some instinct he could not name into the teeth of the storm. He was 45 years old. He had ruled the northern kingdom for 20 years, having taken the throne from his father, who had taken it from his father before him. He had won wars against the eastern tribes and forged alliances with the western kingdoms. He had built roads and bridges and established laws that made his realm the most just and prosperous in all the known lands. By any measure that mattered to the world, he was successful, powerful, a king in the fullest sense of the word. He had never felt more hollow in his life. Isolde had been gone for 36 months now. 36 months, though he tried not to count, though he tried to stop marking each sunrise with the bitter awareness of her absence. 36 months since the night she had labored to bring their son into the world. 36 months since the blood that should have heralded new life had instead spelled the end of everything he loved. She had died with her hand in his, her eyes fixed on his face with an expression he could not read. Her lips had formed words that he could barely hear over his own desperate prayers, over the healer's frantic ministrations, over the sound of his heart breaking into pieces that would never fully mend. The child had followed her within the hour, a boy, perfect and still and silent, with his mother's dark hair and his father's strong jaw. Cale had held his son for only a moment before Marin had gently taken the tiny body from his arms. He had buried them together in the royal crypt, mother and son wrapped in the same white cloth, laid to rest beneath the mountain, where generations of his family slept their eternal sleep. And something inside Cale had been buried with them. The thing that made him feel joy, the thing that made him hope for tomorrow, the thing that made him believe that life was more than duty and death and the endless march of days. His advisors had urged him to remarry almost before the funeral flowers had wilted. The kingdom needed an heir, they said. The bloodline must continue. A king without a successor was a kingdom without a future. He had listened to their counsel with the patient attention of a man who understood politics, and then he had dismissed them with the cold finality of a man who no longer cared about futures he would not share with the woman he loved. Bran, his oldest friend, his beta for 20 years, had stopped talking about remarriage a year ago. Now Bran simply watched him with worried eyes and made sure that someone always knew where Cale walked at night. Just in case the king who would not die by his own hand found another way to end his suffering. Cale was not suicidal. He had considered it in those first dark months when the grief was fresh and the pain was unbearable. But something in his nature recoiled from the dishonor of such an ending. A king did not abandon his people because his heart was broken. A king endured. A king served. A king continued to walk through the darkness until the darkness finally took him. But he could not deny that he was waiting for something, for an ending, for a sign, for any indication that the goddess had not forgotten him entirely, that his suffering served some purpose beyond mere punishment for sins he could not name. The wind changed direction suddenly, and Cale stopped in his tracks. He was deep in Ashwood territory now, farther than he had ever wandered before. The blizzard had intensified in the last hour, visibility dropping until he could barely see his own hands before him. He should turn back. He should find shelter and wait out the storm. He should behave like a rational man who valued his own survival. But there was something in the wind, a sound beneath the howling, a presence that pulled at his attention like a thread tugging at the corner of a tapestry. He turned toward it without conscious decision, his feet carrying him through the deepening snow. The rational part of his mind noted this behavior with clinical concern. Kings did not chase sounds in blizzards. Kings did not wander alone into enemy territory. Kings especially did not follow intuitions that might lead them to their deaths. But Cale had stopped feeling like a king since Isolde passed. Tonight, he was simply a man with nothing left to lose, following a whisper that might be delusion or might be something else entirely. The snow parted like a curtain before him. He saw the pillar first. Ancient stone, perhaps twice his height, carved with symbols so old that even the scholars in his great library could not read them. The pillar stood alone in a clearing, stark and dark against the white chaos of the storm. Then he saw the chains, black iron, thick and cruel, wrapped around the pillar and extending outward to hold something. Someone. His heart, which had been numb for so long, suddenly began to pound. She hung from the chains like a broken puppet, her arms stretched above her head bowed against her chest. She was small, far smaller than he had first thought, with dark hair that had frozen to her cheeks and skin that had turned the blue-white color of deep cold. Her dress, thin cotton that might once have been white, had frozen stiff against her body. Cale had seen death before. He had killed in battle, had watched men die on the field, had visited the crypts where his ancestors lay in silent rows. He knew what death looked like. This woman looked dead. But something made him approach. Something made him reach out with his bare hand and touch her frozen cheek, feeling the ice crystals that had formed on her skin. And when he touched her, two things happened simultaneously. Her eyes opened, and something inside Cale, something that had been cold and still and silent for so long, suddenly sparked to life like a flame catching in dry tinder. Her eyes were gray, the color of winter storms, the color of the mountains at dawn, the color of steel and shadow and survival against impossible odds. They met his golden gaze with an expression that held no hope, no pleading, no expectation of rescue. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a dream she knows will fade upon waking. Beautiful, but impossible. Present, but not real. Then her lips moved. Cracked and blue and barely functional, they formed a single word that the wind immediately stole. But Cale did not need to hear it. He could read the shape of it on her frozen lips. Why? Why had he come? Why had he found her? Why would anyone bother with a worthless Omega who had been left to die? He had no answer for her. He had no answer for himself. But he knew, with a certainty that felt like the first true feeling he had experienced in far too long, that he would not leave her here. He gripped the chains with both hands. They were old iron, thick but brittle from the cold. He felt his eyes flare with the golden light of an alpha's power, felt the strength surge through his arms and shoulders, felt the metal groan and protest beneath his grip. The chains shattered with a sound like breaking ice. She fell forward, her body having no strength to support itself. He caught her before she hit the frozen ground, his arms wrapping around her with reflexive gentleness. She was cold, so cold that holding her was like holding a sculpture made of ice. But beneath the frost, beneath the stillness, he could feel the faint flutter of a heartbeat. She was alive, barely, impossibly, but alive. He stripped off his heavy cloak and wrapped it around her shivering form, knowing it would not be enough, knowing that the warmth of mere fabric could not undo hours of exposure to killing cold. She needed fire. She needed shelter. She needed the kind of care that could only be found within the walls of his fortress. His fortress. 2 days north through a blizzard that showed no signs of weakening. Cale looked at the woman in his arms, at her frozen face and closed eyes and barely breathing chest. He looked at the storm that raged around them, at the snow that fell like a judgment from an unforgiving God. He looked at the long path that lay between here and home. A rational man would calculate the odds and find them wanting. A rational man would know that carrying an unconscious woman through a blizzard for 2 days was a fantasy. A rational man would make his peace with failure before it arrived. Cale was done being rational. He shifted her in his arms until her head rested against his shoulder, until he could feel the faint warmth of her breath against his neck. Then he turned north and began to walk. Behind him, the ancient pillar stood empty, its chains broken, its purpose denied. The storm raged on, but Cale walked through it as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. He had been walking since Isolde died. He had been waiting for something to give his steps meaning. Now finally he had found it. The woman in his arms did not speak again. Her eyes had closed after that single questioning word, and she had fallen into the stillness that lay between consciousness and death. But Cale could feel her heartbeat against his chest, could feel the slight rise and fall of her breathing, could feel the presence of another life depending entirely on his strength. It was enough. For the first time in far too long, it was enough. He walked through the night and into the gray dawn. He walked as the blizzard weakened and the path became clear. He walked until the towers of his fortress rose from the mountain like a crown of stone and ice, their windows lit with the warm glow of fires that never went out. The gates opened without command. The The guards who saw their king emerge from the storm carrying a frozen woman in his arms did not question. They did not delay. They did not do anything except bow low and fall into step behind him. They had learned long ago that Kale moved according to laws they could not see. Sera woke to warmth. This was so unexpected, so completely contrary to everything she had prepared herself for, that for a long moment she simply lay still with her eyes closed and tried to understand what had happened. She remembered the cold. She remembered the chains. She remembered closing her eyes and accepting the end that the goddess had apparently decreed for her. She did not remember being rescued. Slowly, carefully, she opened her eyes. She was in a bed. A real bed, with soft blankets and thick furs and pillows that smelled of lavender and cedar. The room around her was stone-walled but warm, heated by a fire that crackled in a massive hearth. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting scenes of hunting and battle and celebration. Through high windows she could see mountains capped with snow against a gray winter sky. This was not Ashwood. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her body, which had been numb for so long, had apparently decided to feel everything all at once. Her wrists burned where the chains had abraded them. Her feet throbbed with the pain of thawing flesh. Her head pounded with a headache that felt like spikes being driven through her temples. But she was alive, against all expectation, against all logic, against all the laws of cold and time and mortality. She was alive. The door opened, and an old woman entered carrying a tray. She had gray hair pulled back in a severe knot, eyes that missed nothing, and hands that moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for the sick and wounded. "Ah," the woman said, her voice dry as autumn leaves. "You are awake." "Good." I was beginning to wonder if we had rescued a woman or a particularly stubborn corpse. Sera's voice came out as a croak, her throat raw from cold and disuse. "Where am I?" "The Northern Kingdom. The fortress of King Kael, lord of these mountains and all the lands between here and the western forests." The old woman set her tray down on a table beside the bed. "You have been unconscious for 2 days. The king carried you through the blizzard himself, which is the most foolish and admirable thing I have seen him do in 20 years of service. The king." Sera's memories of that night were fragmented, broken by cold and darkness, but she remembered eyes, golden eyes, burning like embers in the heart of the storm. She remembered the sound of chains shattering. She remembered warmth, impossible warmth, pressed against her frozen body. "Why?" she whispered. "That is a question for the king, not for me." The old woman held out a cup filled with something steaming. "I am Marin, the royal healer. My job is to keep you alive. His job is to explain why he bothered. Drink this. It tastes terrible, but it will help with the pain." Sera drank. It did taste terrible, bitter and earthy with an aftertaste of something sweet. But within minutes, the pounding in her head began to ease, and the fire in her wrists dulled to a manageable ache. Marin watched her with assessing eyes that seemed to see far more than Sera was comfortable revealing. "You were starved before they chained you," the healer said matter-of-factly. "Not for days, for months. Someone was killing you slowly before they decided to kill you quickly." Sera said nothing. What could she say? That her pack had reduced her rations year by year until she was surviving on scraps? That Draven had ordered her fed just enough to keep her working, but not enough to give her strength? That the slow starvation had been deliberate, a punishment for the curse of her barrenness that everyone could see and no one would acknowledge? She said nothing because the truth was too heavy and too shameful and too complicated to explain to a stranger. Marin seemed to understand. She nodded once, a gesture that conveyed neither pity nor judgment, and turned toward the door. "Rest. Eat what you can. The king will want to see you when you are strong enough to speak." Then she was gone, and Sera was alone with her thoughts and her pain and the impossible fact of her continued existence. She lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. Stone, like everything else in this place, but carved with intricate patterns of vines and leaves and flowers. Someone had cared about beauty here. Someone had believed that even cold stone could be made to celebrate life. Why had he saved her? The question circled in her mind like a hawk looking for prey. She was nobody, less than nobody, a barren omega from a hostile pack, chained to a pillar as a sacrifice to the storm. There was no political advantage in rescuing her, no strategic benefit, no gain of any kind that she could see. So why? She did not realize she had fallen asleep until she woke again to find the room darker, the fire lower, and a man sitting in a chair beside her bed. He was not what she expected. In her imagination, kings were old men with gray beards and cruel eyes, concerned with nothing but power and legacy. The man before her was perhaps 45, with dark hair silvered at the temples, and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as his fortress. Strong features, weathered by time and responsibility, with lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter long absent. His eyes were gold, the unmistakable mark of an ancient alpha bloodline passed down through generations of rulers. But there was no cruelty in them, only exhaustion, only the kind of weariness that came from carrying burdens too heavy for too long. She pushed herself up against the pillows, ignoring the protest of her battered body. He did not move to help her, did not lean forward with false concern. He simply watched, assessing her the way she had seen generals assess a battlefield. "You are the king, not a question." "Yes." His voice was low, roughened by something she could not identify. "And you are the woman who is chained to die in my neighbor's territory. I think we both have questions." Sera felt her defenses rise, the walls she had built over 16 years of surviving among people who wished her harm. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know why they chained you. The truth." She almost laughed. The truth. How many times had she offered truth, only to be punished for it? How many times had she learned that truth was the most dangerous weapon a person could wield? But something in his eyes made her pause, something that looked almost like hunger. Not for her body, not in the way men sometimes looked at women, but for honesty, for the kind of answer that most people spent their lives avoiding. "They said I was barren," she said finally, "that my presence was a curse on the pack's fertility, that the goddess had marked me unworthy." His expression did not change. "That is what they said. What is the truth?" Sera took a breath that hurt her still healing lungs. "The truth is that I saw the Alpha selling information to raiders. Maps of our territory, patrol schedules, the locations of vulnerable settlements." She met his golden eyes without flinching. "I went to the council and accused him. He called me a witch and a liar. The council chose to believe him." She paused. "He chained me to die not because I am barren. He chained me because I know what he is. Dead women tell no tales." Silence fell between them. The king studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. If he did not believe her, she would rather know now. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Can you prove any of this?" "No." She felt the bitter familiarity of that word. "I cannot prove any of it. I saw it. I know it. But knowledge without evidence is just accusation." "Then how do you know?" Sera struggled to find words for something that defied explanation. "I just know. Since I was a child. I see things. Not the future. The truth. I look at someone and I know if they are lying. I see a situation and I understand what is really happening beneath the surface. It is not magic. It is not prophecy. It is just knowing." She expected disbelief, mockery, the dismissal she had received every time she tried to explain. But the king only nodded, his expression unchanged. "My grandmother had a gift," he said quietly. "She could find lost things, objects, people, sometimes even ideas that others had forgotten. She called it following the threads. She said the world was full of connections that most people could not see." He leaned forward slightly in his chair. She also said that gifts like hers ran in families, that they appeared in different forms across generations, and that they were both blessing and curse, depending on how they were used. Sera stared at him. "You believe me. I believe you are telling me what you experience. Whether that experience reflects reality is a different question." He stood, his movements deliberate. "But I am inclined to investigate. If Alpha Draven is truly selling his people to raiders, it is a threat to more than just Ashwood." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "You have sanctuary here for as long as you need it. When you are strong enough, I will have more questions. But for now, rest, recover." He was almost out the door when she spoke. "Why did you save me?" The king stopped. For a long moment he did not answer, and Sera wondered if she had pushed too far, asked too much. Then he turned, and the look on his face was something she had not expected. Not anger, not irritation, something closer to confusion, to wonder, to the expression of a man confronting a question he had been asking himself. "I do not know," he said finally. I was walking the borders, as I do every night. I heard nothing, saw nothing, but I knew I needed to be there. When I found you—" He paused, his golden eyes searching her face. It felt like answering a question I had been asking for a very long time. Then he was gone, and Sera was alone with a truth she did not know how to interpret. Days passed. Sera grew stronger. She ate everything that Marin brought and asked for more. She slept deeply and walked circles around her room until her legs stopped trembling. She was not a prisoner. No one asked where she went. No one stopped her from exploring. But she was being watched. She could feel the weight of attention following her. On the fourth day, Lord Brennan came to see her. He was old, perhaps 70, with white hair and eyes that held decades of wisdom. Despite his age, his mind remained sharp as a blade, and his voice carried the authority of one who had counseled kings for half a century. "Lady Sera," he said, "I have served as advisor to 3 kings of this realm. I have something you need to hear." He withdrew a letter from his robe. This was written by Queen Isolde, 36 months ago, the night before she died. She gave it to me and made me swear to hold it until the right moment. Sera's heart beat faster. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Isolde had dreams that came true. On the night before her death, she wrote this and told me to give it to the king when he saved someone without obligation, when he brought home a stranger with no claim on his protection." Brennan looked at her with knowing eyes. "She described you, Lady Sera, not by name, but by circumstance." The king received them in his private study. When Brennan explained, something shifted in Cale's face. Fear, hope, pain. He broke the seal and read. Sera watched shock transform to anguish, transform to something that might have been wonder. "She knew she was going to die," he said, his voice breaking. "She knew the birth would kill her, and she chose not to tell me. She wanted me to have those last months of hope." He looked at Sera with tears in his golden eyes. "She said someone was coming who would help me find my way back to the living. She said I would know this person because I would save them without reason." Brennan withdrew a golden locket. She asked that whoever fulfilled her prophecy hold this. She said the gift would recognize the gift. Sera understood. She reached for the locket, and when her fingers closed around it, the world dissolved. She saw Isolde, dark-haired and beautiful, writing with desperate speed. She felt Isolde's memories flooding through her. Dreams of a girl chained to a pillar, prayers to the goddess for someone to save her husband from grief. The answer that came not in words but images. A future where broken things mended other broken things. And she saw Isolde choose, not to tell Cale of the danger, but to trust that the goddess would keep her promise. Sera gasped and released the locket. Cale caught her. "She knew about me," Sera whispered. "She saw me chained to that pillar. She chose to die because she believed you would find me." For a long moment they stood in silence, 2 broken people discovering that their jagged edges might fit together. "I do not know what this means," Cale said finally, "but I know you are welcome here, for as long as you wish." It was a beginning. 2 weeks later, Sera attended her first council session. When a lord named Haken lied about embezzled tribute, she felt the familiar wrongness in his words. When the king's eyes asked the silent question, she spoke. "Lord Haken is lying. The records are falsified. The tribute was never paid." Investigators found everything she predicted. Word spread through the kingdom. The king had found himself a truth-seer. And in distant Ashwood, Alpha Draven received the news with cold fury. He arrived with 20 warriors. Sera felt him coming before the sentries reported. "King Cale," Draven said smoothly, "I come to reclaim what belongs to Ashwood." "She is under my protection," Cale replied without rising from his throne. "Pack law gives me the right to demand her return. Pack law ends at my borders, and I do not return wolves to those who would kill them." Draven's eyes flickered with something dark. "Let us speak privately. Alpha to King." They were gone for an hour. When they emerged, Draven's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "We leave," he told his warriors. After they departed, Cale stood beside Sera with a troubled expression. "He told me something about his father," Cale said quietly. 10 years ago, the Alpha of Ashwood was accused by a truth-seer, convicted on her word alone, executed. Sera felt cold spread through her chest. Draven believes his father was innocent, that the truth-seer was wrong, that her interpretation cost an innocent man his life. Cale looked at her. "He hates you not because you accused him, but because your gift reminds him of the woman who killed his father." The words struck Sera like blows. Could she be wrong? Could her gift show not truth but merely her interpretation of truth? "What will you do?" she asked. "I will not give you to him, But I cannot ignore what he said. If truth seers can be wrong, I must understand that possibility. Kael took her hand. Will you help me understand, Sera? Will you teach me to trust your gift by first being honest about its limits? Sera looked at this man who had saved her, believed her, defended her. Yes, she said, I will show you everything, the truths I see and the ways I might be wrong. The king nodded, and something in his expression softened. Then we begin tomorrow. Whatever we discover together. Outside, winter wind howled across the mountains. But inside, two people stood hand in hand and made a choice. To seek truth together. To risk being wrong. To trust that even imperfect gifts could serve justice, if wielded with humility. The road ahead was uncertain. Draven would not surrender easily. Forces were gathering that neither could yet perceive. But for now, there was warmth. There was safety. There was the beginning of something that might become trust. And for a woman who had been chained to a pillar and left to die, that beginning was more than enough. The testing began on the first day of the new moon. Kael had assembled 12 men in the Great Hall, each seated at a separate table with documents spread before them. Some were merchants from the eastern provinces, weathered men with calculating eyes and hands roughened by years of counting coin and weighing goods. Some were soldiers who bore scars from border skirmishes, their postures rigid with military discipline, even in this unfamiliar setting. Some were servants from distant parts of the fortress, men whose faces Sera had never seen in her weeks of recovery, men who existed in the shadows of greater lives. That was the point. She knew none of them. She had no context, no history, no way of guessing their truths or their lies. Only her gift could tell her what they hid beneath their carefully composed expressions. "Tell me which of these men are lying," Kael said. He stood beside her at the head of the hall, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. "Each has been given a story to tell. Some stories are true, some are false. I need to know if your gift can tell the difference consistently, under controlled conditions, without any other information to guide you." Sera looked at the 12 strangers and felt the familiar stirring at the back of her mind. The sense that had been with her since childhood, the knowing that came unbidden and unwanted, began to wake from its slumber like a beast rousing from long hibernation. It stretched within her consciousness, hungry for the truths that surrounded her. She walked to the first man, a merchant with gray in his beard and ink stains on his fingers that spoke of a lifetime recording transactions. He told her about a shipment of wool that had been lost at sea 3 months ago, about the insurance claim he had filed with the trading guild, about the compensation he believed he was owed for goods that would never reach their destination. His voice was steady, practiced in the art of negotiation. His eyes met hers without flinching. His hands remained still on the table before him. But beneath the surface calm, beneath the carefully composed exterior, Sera sensed nothing false, no dissonance, no wrongness, no gap between what he said and what he believed. "True," she said, "every word." She moved to the second man, a young soldier with nervous hands and a scar above his left eye that pulled his brow into a permanent expression of worry. He spoke of a patrol that had encountered bandits in the northern mountain pass 2 weeks prior, of a fight that had left 2 of his companions dead in the snow, of his own heroism in carrying a wounded comrade 3 miles through hostile territory to safety. The wrongness hit her like a wave of cold water. His words were smooth but hollow, rehearsed lines delivered with false emotion. The shape of his telling did not match the shape of truth. "False," Sera said. "The bandits were never there. You invented the story to explain why you abandoned your post." She paused, seeing deeper. "Your comrade was wounded, yes, but you left him bleeding in the pass because you were afraid of what you thought was coming. He crawled to safety himself while you hid in a cave a mile away." The soldier's face went white as fresh snow, his mouth open to protest, to deny, to offer some excuse. Then it closed again as he realized the futility of denial. Something in Sera's eyes told him that further argument would only reveal more. She continued down the line. "True, false, true, true, false, true, false, false, true, false, true." With each verdict, her certainty grew stronger, but so did the pressure building behind her eyes. It was like lifting weights that grew heavier with each repetition. By the time she reached the 12th man, her head was pounding with pain that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Her hands were trembling visibly, and the world had begun to blur and swim at the edges of her vision. She gave her verdict on the final story, a tale of stolen inheritance that was false in every particular, and then her legs buckled beneath her like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Kale caught her before she hit the cold stone floor, his arms wrapping around her waist with the swift reflexes of a man trained for combat. She leaned into him without thinking, without considering propriety or distance. She was too exhausted to care. His chest was warm and solid against her cheek. His heartbeat was steady in her ear. His arms held her as though she were something precious. "You were correct on all 12, he said quietly. His breath was warm against her hair, stirring the dark strands that had come loose from her braid, every single one. "Of course I was correct." Her voice came out as a whisper, drained of all strength. "I am always correct about such things. That is the problem." He helped her to a chair and called for water and food. The 12 men were dismissed, some relieved to escape the chamber where their souls had been laid bare, some shaken by the experience of being seen so completely by a stranger. All of them looked at Sera with expressions that ranged from awe to barely concealed fear. She ignored them all. She had seen those looks her entire life. They no longer had the power to wound her. But the exhaustion was new, or rather, it was an old companion that had grown stronger and more demanding. Every time she used her gift now, it cost her more than it had in the years when she had hidden it behind silence and downcast eyes. As if opening herself to truth had also opened a door that she could not fully close, a door through which her own life force leaked away with each revelation. Marin examined her that evening in the quiet of her chambers, with candles flickering shadows across the walls and the fire burning low in the hearth. The healer pressed fingers to her pulse and counted silently, her lips moving with each beat. She peered into Sera's eyes with a candle flame held close, watching how the pupils reacted to light and dark. "How long has this been happening?" Marin demanded. "The exhaustion after using your gift, the headaches that feel like your skull is being squeezed, the trembling hands that take hours to steady." "Always," Sera admitted, "since I was a child. Since the first time I looked at someone and knew they were lying without being told. But it has grown worse since I came here." "Since you began using your gift openly," Marin corrected. "Since you stopped hiding what you are and started wielding it as a tool. Is there a difference?" The healer was silent for a long moment, her weathered face grave with the weight of old memories. When she spoke again, her voice carried the heaviness of hard truths delivered too many times. "I have seen this before, once, many years ago, when I was still a young apprentice learning the healing arts. There was a woman in the Western Territories, in a village near the edge of the Great Forest, who had a gift similar to yours. She could sense lies the way you do, could feel the shape of deception in a person's words like a splinter beneath the skin. She used it to help her village resolve disputes and catch criminals. She was celebrated at first, then feared, then something worse than feared." Marin paused, her face drawn with remembered sorrow. "She burned out within 5 years. Her gift consumed her from the inside, like a fire that feeds on its own fuel until nothing remains but ash. By the end, she could not tell truth from lie, reality from delusion. The gift that had once shown her everything true showed her nothing but phantoms and shadows. She died mad and alone, screaming about betrayals that existed only in her shattered mind." Sera's blood ran cold in her veins. "You think that will happen to me? I think it is already beginning." Marin sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. "Your gift is not like a muscle that grows stronger with use. It is like a wound that opens wider every time you touch it. Without training, without learning to control the flow of perception, you will destroy yourself. Perhaps not in 5 years, perhaps not in 10, but eventually, certainly, completely. Then I will stop using it." "Can you?" The question was gentle but pointed. Can you truly close your eyes to truth once you have learned to see it so clearly? Can you stand in a room full of lies and say nothing, do nothing, pretend you cannot see what is obvious to you? Can you watch innocent people suffer because of deceptions you could expose with a word and hold your tongue? Sera thought about Mira, the child who had died of hunger because she had chosen silence over risk. She thought about her mother, dead because no one had listened to a 7-year-old girl's desperate warnings. She thought about Draven, still free, still selling his people to raiders, still breathing and scheming while innocents suffered because of his greed. "No," she admitted, "I cannot. Then we must find another way." Marin stood and moved toward the door. "There is someone who might be able to help. An elder who lives in the sacred grove 3 days north of here, deep in the mountains where few dare to travel. She is old, older than anyone I have ever known, and she has trained others with gifts like yours. If anyone can teach you to survive your own power, it is her." Kael received this news in silence. He had come to Sera's chambers as he did every evening now, bringing food and companionship and the quiet comfort of his presence. They had fallen into a routine over the past week since Draven's departure, a rhythm of shared meals and careful conversation that felt almost domestic. She had not expected to find comfort in his company. She had not expected to find comfort anywhere in this world that had treated her so cruelly for so long. But there was something in the way he listened, the way he considered her words before responding, the way he treated her opinions as things of value rather than annoyances to be dismissed. He did not look at her with fear or suspicion or the hungry calculation of someone wondering how to use her gift for their own ends. He looked at her like a person, like someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered. He made her feel seen in a way she had never been seen before. "I will take you myself," he said now, setting down the cup of wine he had been holding, "to the sacred grove. If this elder can help you control your gift, then we must seek her out immediately. You cannot leave the kingdom." Sera shook her head. "You have duties here, responsibilities that cannot be delegated. A king does not abandon his throne to escort a single woman through the wilderness. This king does." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I have spent 36 months abandoning everything that matters in pursuit of nothing, walking the borders every night, staring at the mountains without seeing them, waiting for death or meaning, whichever came first. For once, I would like to abandon nothing in pursuit of something that truly matters." She stared at him, uncertain how to interpret his words. He met her gaze without flinching, and in his golden eyes she saw something that made her breath catch in her chest. Not desire, not yet, but the seed of something deeper, the first stirring of a connection that might, given time and trust and the courage to reach for it, grow into more. It filled her with both fear and wonder. They departed 3 days later, traveling light with only Bran and 2 guards as escort. The journey north would take at least 3 days through mountain passes that grew increasingly treacherous as they climbed. Winter was deepening around them, the snow thickening with each mile they traveled north. Marin had provided detailed directions to the sacred grove, along with stern warnings about the elder who dwelt there. "She is not gentle," the healer had said. "She is not kind. She will see through every defense you have built over 23 years and force you to confront truths you have spent your life avoiding. But if you survive her teaching, you will emerge stronger than you ever imagined possible." Sera had packed her few belongings in silence that morning, acutely aware of the weight of what she was leaving behind. The fortress had become something unexpected in the weeks since her rescue. Not just a shelter, but a home. The first place since her childhood where she had felt something other than fear and suspicion. As they passed through the gates and began the climb into the mountains, she allowed herself one glance back. The towers rose against the gray sky like sentinels, and somewhere within those walls, servants were preparing for another day, guards were changing their posts, and life continued its ordinary rhythms. She wondered if she would see any of it again. The first day passed without incident. They rode through forests of ancient pine, following trails that wound between granite boulders and frozen streams that had only begun to freeze solid with the deepening winter. The air grew colder as they climbed, thin and sharp in their lungs, but Sera barely noticed. Her mind was occupied with questions she could not answer and fears she could not name. Bran rode ahead, scouting the path with the practiced wariness of a man who had spent decades guarding others. The 2 soldiers flanked them on either side, hands never far from their weapons. Kael rode beside Sera, close enough that their knees sometimes touched when the trail narrowed. They spoke little during the daylight hours. The concentration required for the treacherous paths left no room for conversation. But Sera was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the way his golden eyes scanned the tree line for threats, of the unconscious grace with which he guided his horse through the difficult terrain. He was a man built for action, she realized, a man who had been forced into stillness by grief and was only now remembering how to move again. That night, they made camp in a sheltered hollow where the wind could not reach and the stars spread across the sky like scattered diamonds. The guards set up a perimeter while Bran built the fire with the efficiency of long practice. Within the hour, flames crackled against the darkness, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding rocks. Chaol sat beside Sera at the fire, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through her cloak. The stars had emerged above them, thousands of points of light scattered across the black canvas of the sky. In Ashwood, she had rarely looked up at night. There had been no beauty worth seeing in a world that despised her. But here, with the mountains rising around them and the fire's warmth at her back, she found herself marveling at the vastness of the universe. "Tell me about your life before," he said. His voice was quiet, meant only for her ears. "Before Ashwood turned against you, before the chains. There is nothing to tell." Sera watched the flames dance and tried not to think about all the things she had lost. "I was born different. I grew up hated. I survived. That is the whole of it." "No." His voice was gentle but insistent. "That is the outline. I want the details. I want to understand who you were before the world tried to break you." "Why?" "Because I am trying to understand who you are now. And because talking about pain is sometimes the only way to release it. For 36 months I told no one what I felt about Isolde's death. I buried it deep and let it fester like a wound that would not heal. It nearly destroyed me." She was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up toward the stars. In the distance, a wolf howled at the hidden moon. "My mother loved me," she said finally, "before she got sick. She used to sing to me at night, songs about the old gods and the spirits that live in the mountains. She told me that my gift was a blessing, that the goddess had marked me for great things." She paused, her voice catching on memories she had buried deep. She was the only one who ever said that. "What happened to her?" "I told you. She died when I was 7. A sickness in her chest that the healers could not cure. I knew it was coming. I felt it in my bones, saw it in the way she looked at me sometimes with such sadness. I tried to warn my father, but he would not listen." Chaol nodded slowly. "And after she was gone?" "After she was gone, I was alone. My father blamed me for her death, said I had cursed her with my knowing. The other children threw stones and called me witch. The adults whispered behind their hands when they thought I could not hear. Sera's voice hardened with old anger. I learned very quickly that truth was not a gift. It was a curse. The more I saw, the more people hated me for seeing. So you learned to hide. I learned to survive. There is a difference." "Is there?" She turned to look at him, and in the firelight his face was all shadows and angles, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. "Yes," she said. "Hiding is pretending to be something you are not. Surviving is accepting what you are and finding a way to live with it. I never pretended to be normal. I just stopped telling people how abnormal I truly was." He considered this for a moment. "And now? Now that you are no longer hiding?" "Now I face each day not knowing what it will bring." She admitted it without shame. "Now I am using my gift openly for the first time in my life, and I can feel it taking something from me with each use. Now I am traveling to meet an ancient elder who may or may not be able to save me from myself." She paused. "And now I am sitting beside a king who looks at me like I am something worth looking at, and I do not know how to respond to that." Chaol was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotions he had not allowed himself to feel in years. "I spent 36 months looking at nothing," he said, "walking through the world without seeing it, existing without living. And then I found you in that storm, and something inside me woke up." He turned to face her fully. "I do not know what this is between us. I do not know where it will lead. But I know that for the first time since Isolde died, I feel something other than grief, and that both frightens and amazes me." They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers, feeling the warmth fade as the night deepened around them. But somewhere in that silence, something shifted between them. A wall crumbled, a door opened. A possibility took root in the space between two wounded hearts, learning to trust again. The sacred grove appeared on the 3rd day, hidden behind veils of mist and ancient magic. The trees here were older than memory, their trunks so vast that 10 men could not have circled them with joined hands. The air smelled of pine and snow, and something else, something that made Sera's gift stir uneasily within her. Truth, she realized. The air itself was saturated with truth. Every breath she took brought clarity she had not asked for. "Wait here," she told Cale and the others. "I need to go in alone." He started to protest, but something in her face stopped him. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, squeezing gently. "Come back," he said. "Whatever happens in there, come back. I will try." She walked into the grove alone, following a path that seemed to create itself before her feet. The mist parted as she advanced, revealing glimpses of carved stones and ancient markers half buried in centuries of moss. The silence was absolute. Not even birds sang here. The elder was waiting for her in a clearing at the heart of the grove. She was impossibly old, older than any person Sera had ever seen or imagined. Her face was a map of wrinkles carved deep by time, her hair white as fresh snow and fine as spider silk. But there was no frailty in her presence. She sat upon a flat stone as if it were a throne from which she had ruled for 1,000 years, and her eyes were sharp and bright, the color of polished silver coins that had seen the rise and fall of empires. They fixed on Sera with an intensity that made her want to turn and flee. "So," the elder said. Her voice was surprisingly strong, carrying easily across the clearing. "You are the one they have been whispering about, the truth seer who cannot control her sight, the girl who sees too much and understands too little. My name is Sera. I know your name. Names are irrelevant. They are masks we wear to pretend we are separate from each other. What matters is what you are. And what you are, child, is dangerous. More dangerous than you can possibly understand." Sera straightened her spine, refusing to be cowed. "I came here to learn control, to survive my gift without being consumed by it. Control." The elder laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling in an autumn wind. "You speak of control as if it were something that could be taught in a few lessons." She rose from her stone, moving with surprising fluidity for one so ancient. Sera noticed with a chill that her feet did not quite touch the moss-covered ground. She floated rather than walked. "I am Ravenna," the elder said. "I have walked this world for 123 years. I have trained 7 truth seers in that time, each one believing they could master what cannot be mastered. Do you know how many survived their training?" Sera shook her head. 3. Ravenna's silver eyes bored into hers. 4 died, not from the training itself, but from what it revealed about themselves. They could not bear to see their own truths, so they chose to stop seeing entirely. She circled Sera slowly, examining her from every angle. "But you are different, are you not? You have already seen terrible truths about yourself. You have already survived them." "I have survived," Sera agreed. "I do not know if I have truly seen everything there is to see." "Honest. That is good." Ravenna stopped directly in front of her. "If you lie to me even once, I will know, and our lessons will end. I have never been able to lie convincingly. It is one advantage of my gift." The elder smiled. "Then let us begin with the first truth." She reached out and pressed one finger to Sera's forehead. "You are not a pathfinder. You have never been a pathfinder. You are something far more rare and far more dangerous." Lightning tore through Sera's mind. She gasped as visions flooded her consciousness with the force of a river breaking through a dam. Other women, other truth-seers, stretching back through centuries of history. She saw them rise and fall, celebrated and condemned and burned. "You are a truth-seer," Ravenna said, her voice seeming to come from far away. "The rarest of all gifts. Pathfinders can sense lies. Truth-seers can reveal them. You do not merely see truth, you can make others see it too. You can tear away the veils people wrap around their secrets and force them to confront what they have hidden." The vision shifted. Sera saw a woman standing before a king, her hand raised, her eyes blazing silver. The king screamed as his sins were laid bare. His court turned against him, and the woman who had revealed him was seized and carried to a pyre while the crowd cheered. 200 years ago, Ravenna continued, a truth-seer named Ilara exposed the crimes of the Eastern Emperor. She showed his court the truth of his reign. The emperor was overthrown. Justice was served. "What happened to her?" Sera asked. "She was burned alive. The new rulers feared what she might reveal about them." Ravenna withdrew her finger, and the visions faded. That is the fate of truth-seers who are not careful. Sera sank to her knees. "The man who condemned me, Draven, his father was executed by a truth-seer. Yes, I remember it. Her name was Mora. She was one of my students. Was she wrong? Draven claims his father was innocent. Ravenna was silent for a long moment. Mora did not make a mistake. Draven's father was guilty of everything she accused him of. But truth is a blade that cuts both ways. When Mora revealed his crimes, she also revealed her own motives. She had loved a man that Draven's father had killed. Her truth was accurate, but it was also vengeance. The council could see that. What happened to Mora? She left the grove and never returned. But I know she never forgave herself. She had hoped to bring justice. Instead, she brought chaos. Draven himself was twisted by grief into something dark. The evil she exposed was replaced by an evil she created. Sera absorbed this slowly. So truth alone is not enough. Truth alone is never enough. Truth without wisdom is a weapon without a wielder. If you wish to survive your gift, you must learn not only to see truth, but to understand when and how to reveal it. How long will that take? Years, a lifetime. But we will begin with what we have. You will stay here for 2 months. I will teach you the foundations. 2 months. Sera thought of Kael waiting outside. He cannot stay that long. He has responsibilities. Then he will go, and you will remain. This is not negotiable. Either you commit to the training completely, or you accept that your gift will destroy you. I will stay, Sera said. Kael received the news with the acceptance of a man who had learned to expect hardship. He stood at the edge of the grove, his golden eyes fixed on Sera's face. 2 months, he said. I will handle whatever emerges. And when you return, we will face the future together. Then he was gone, riding south with Bran and the guards, leaving Sera alone with an ancient elder and a gift that might save her or destroy her. The training was brutal beyond anything Sera had imagined. Ravenna did not believe in gentle instruction. She believed in breaking down and building up, in shattering every illusion before constructing something true and lasting. Every day began before dawn, when the mist was thickest and the boundary between the grove and the rest of the world felt most permeable. Ravenna would lead Sera to different locations within the ancient forest, each one sacred, each one humming with power that made Sera's gift throb like a second heartbeat. First, you must learn to see yourself, Ravenna said on the first morning. Every lie you have told, every truth you have avoided, every compromise you have made with your own integrity. Until you can face the darkness within yourself, you will never be able to face it in others without being destroyed. Every day, she forced Sera to confront aspects of herself that she had spent years avoiding, burying under layers of survival instinct and protective numbness. Every night, Sera collapsed into exhausted sleep, her mind raw from revelations she had not wanted to face, her heart aching with wounds she had thought long healed. You hate yourself, Ravenna said on the third day. They sat beside a pool of still water, its surface mirror still in the windless air. Not for what you are, but for what you failed to do. You carry the deaths of innocence on your shoulders like stones around your neck, and you believe you deserve to drown under their weight. Sera did not deny it. She could not. In this place, lies were impossible. You believed that speaking truth earlier would have saved them. The elder shook her head. But you were a child, a frightened child with no one to guide her. The deaths you mourn were not your fault. They were the fault of those who refused to listen. I could have made them listen. Sera's voice cracked. I could have been louder, more insistent, more. You were 7 years old when your mother died, 15 when the child starved. What more could you have done? Ravenna's silver eyes were not unkind. The world failed you, Sera, not the other way around. Until you accept that, you will never fully control your gift. The weeks passed in a blur of lessons and revelations. Sera learned to build walls in her mind, barriers that could filter the flood of truth that constantly threatened to overwhelm her. She learned to direct her sight, to focus on specific lies rather than drowning in the general tide of deception that surrounded all human interaction. On the 5th week, she learned the true nature of her power. Watch, Ravenna commanded, leading Sera to a pool of still water at the heart of the grove. Look into the pool and think of a truth you know, something small, something harmless. Sera thought of the sky. She thought of its blueness, its vastness, its eternal presence above the world. The pool rippled, and suddenly she could see the sky within it. Not a reflection, an actual window into the heavens. That is the first level of your gift, Ravenna said, seeing truth and making it visible. Now think of a deeper truth, something about yourself. Sera thought of her loneliness, the years of isolation, of being different, of standing apart from everyone she had ever known. The pool rippled again, and this time Ravenna gasped. The vision that appeared was not just Sera's loneliness. It was loneliness itself. It was every person who had ever stood alone, every child who had ever been outcast, every soul who had ever yearned for connection and found only emptiness. The pool had become a window into a universal truth, and everyone who looked upon it would feel what Sera felt. "Do you understand now?" Ravenna's voice was hushed. "This is what you are. This is what a truth-seer can do. You do not merely see truth, you transmit it. You make others feel it as deeply as you do." Sera stared at the pool, watching the visions slowly fade. Her heart was pounding, her hands were shaking. "This is why they fear us," she whispered. "This is why they burn us," Ravenna agreed. "But it is also why they need us. A world without truth is a world built on sand. Sooner or later it collapses, and when it does, it takes everyone with it." 2 months became 3. The snows of winter melted into the first thaws of spring before Ravenna declared her training complete. "You have learned all I can teach you here," Ravenna said. "The rest you will learn through living, through choosing when to reveal and when to conceal, through making mistakes and bearing their consequences." She pressed something into Sera's hand, a small stone, smooth and white, with a silver rune carved into its surface. "This is a truth stone. It will amplify your gift when you need it and dampen it when you need rest. Use it wisely." Sera closed her fingers around the stone. "Thank you for everything." "Do not thank me yet." Ravenna's face was grim. "You are returning to a world that has changed while you were gone. During your 3 months here, forces have been gathering. Your king has faced challenges. The peace you left behind may no longer exist." Sera departed the grove at dawn on the first day of true spring, riding south on a horse Ravenna had provided. The journey back to the fortress took 4 days, and with each passing mile, her sense of unease grew stronger. The villages she passed through were quiet, their inhabitants watchful and wary. She saw soldiers on the roads, far more than she remembered, and their faces held the tension of men expecting conflict. When she finally reached the fortress, the gates stood open but heavily guarded. The captain who met her looked relieved to see her. "Lady Sera, thank the goddess. The king has been asking for you every day." "What happened? What did I miss?" "Everything, my lady." The captain's face was grave. "While you were away training, Draven fled to the Western Kingdom. He arrived at King Valdric's court 6 weeks ago and has been whispering poison ever since. Valdric has given him sanctuary and troops. The war has begun." She found Kael in the council chamber, surrounded by maps and advisors and the barely controlled chaos of military planning. Officers came and went with reports, their faces grim with the news they carried. Servants hurried along the walls, bringing food and drink that went untouched. The air was thick with tension, with the scent of fear and determination that preceded all wars. Kael stood at the head of the great table, his hands braced against the wood as he studied the positions marked on the maps before him. His shoulders bore the weight of a kingdom at war, and the lines around his eyes had deepened in her absence. He looked older than she remembered, worn thin by the burden of command and the impossible choices it demanded. Then he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, and for a moment his mask slipped. She saw the exhaustion he had been hiding from his men, the worry that gnawed at him in the quiet hours, the relief that flooded his features at the sight of her alive and well and returned to him at last. "You came back," he said. His voice cracked slightly on the words, betraying emotions he usually kept hidden behind the wall of kingship. "I told you I would." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. It was not a gentle embrace. It was the desperate grip of a man who had been holding himself together by force of will and had finally found something solid to hold on to. "Draven escaped during your 2nd month with Ravenna," he said against her hair. "He fled to Valdric and convinced him that our kingdom posed a threat. They march on our borders with 10,000 soldiers." Sera absorbed this news, and the Council of Alphas? Split. Half support us. Half are waiting to see who wins before committing. Kael released her and stepped back, his face hardening into the mask of kingship once more. "We are outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and running out of time." Sera looked at the maps spread across the table, at the markers indicating enemy positions and allied forces, and the narrow gap between them. "Then it is good that I returned when I did," she said. because I have learned things in the grove that may change everything." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the truth stone, feeling its weight and its power. "I am not just a pathfinder," she said. "I am something more, something that Valdric fears and Draven has reason to hate. And if we use it wisely, it may be the weapon that saves us all." Kael looked at her, at the stone in her hand, at the new confidence in her bearing and the ancient knowledge in her eyes. "Tell me," he said, "tell me everything." And she did. The War Council convened at dawn. Kael stood at the head of the great table, surrounded by his generals and advisors, their faces grim in the gray morning light that filtered through the high windows. Maps covered every surface, weighted down with stones and daggers, marked with the positions of armies that would soon clash in the mountain passes. The air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of worry that always preceded war. Outside the windows, the fortress was already stirring with activity. Soldiers drilled in the courtyard below, their swords catching the weak spring sun. Blacksmiths hammered at their forges, preparing weapons for the conflict everyone knew was coming. Women and children had been evacuated to the inner keeps, their faces pale with fear as they watched their husbands and fathers prepare to die. 10,000 soldiers, Bran said, pointing to the western markers on the largest map. Valdric has assembled the largest army the Western Kingdom has fielded in 50 years. They march on our borders as we speak. Our scouts report they will reach the mountain passes within 2 weeks. "And our numbers?" Kael asked, though he already knew the answer. He had spent sleepless nights reviewing the reports, counting the men available, calculating the odds of survival. 6,000. Bran's voice was flat, devoid of the false hope that lesser men might have offered. "Perhaps 7 if we call every able man from the villages. But farmers with pitchforks are not soldiers. They will break at the first charge." Lord Brennan, ancient and frail but still sharp of mind, cleared his throat from his seat at the far end of the table. He had served 3 kings before Kael, had seen wars come and go like seasons, had watched young men march off to glory and return as corpses or not at all. At 70 winters, he was the oldest member of the council, and perhaps the wisest. "There is another option, sire," the old lord said. "Negotiation. We could offer territorial concessions, perhaps the southern timber routes. It would be painful, but less painful than war." Kael's jaw tightened. "And what of Draven? He is with Valdric now, whispering poison in his ear. Any negotiation will include demands for Sera's return." He looked around the table at the men who had served him faithfully for years. "Do any of you truly believe Valdric will accept peace without her as part of the price?" The room fell silent. Every man present knew what that meant. Every man present had seen what Sera could do, had watched her expose liars and traitors with nothing more than a glance. She had become invaluable to the kingdom in the weeks before her training, and now, with her powers fully awakened, she was worth more than any army. Sera stepped forward from where she had been standing in the shadows, listening to strategies that concerned her life being discussed as if she were not present. "There is another way," she said. Every eye turned to her. She felt the weight of their attention, the mixture of respect and fear that her gift inspired. She had grown accustomed to such looks, but they still unsettled her. "I will go to Valdric," she continued, "as a voluntary hostage, a gesture of good faith to begin negotiations." The council erupted. Voices rose in protest and argument, but Kael's single word cut through the chaos like a blade. "No." He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice carried the absolute authority of a king who would not be contradicted. "I will not trade you for peace," he said. His golden eyes met hers across the table. "That is not a decision I am willing to make." Sera held his gaze without flinching. "With respect, sire, it is not your decision to make. It is mine." The silence that followed was profound. No one in the room had ever heard anyone speak to the king that way. No one had ever dared. Sera continued before anyone could recover. "All my life, I have been forced to sacrifice, forced to hide, forced to suffer for things beyond my control. For the first time, I have the chance to choose my own sacrifice, to give myself willingly for something that matters, rather than being taken against my will for something that does not." She looked around the room at the hard faces of men who had spent their lives making impossible choices. "If I stay here and we fight, thousands will die. Farmers and soldiers and fathers and sons, and we may still lose. But if I go to Valdric, I become the weapon that decides this war, not through violence, but through truth." Kael's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. You are asking me to send you into the enemy's hands, to trust that a man who has allied with Draven will treat you fairly. I am asking you to trust me, to believe that I know what I am doing, to have faith that the gift the goddess gave me was not meant to be hidden away in a fortress, but used in the moments when it matters most. The king was silent for a long moment. Around him, his advisors exchanged uncertain glances. They had never seen him so conflicted, so torn between duty and something else, something they did not have a name for. Finally, Kale spoke. "Clear the room." The advisors hesitated, but something in their king's face told them not to argue. One by one, they filed out, Lord Brennan moving slowly with the careful steps of advanced age. Soon, Kale and Sera were alone in the great hall with only the morning light and the weight of the decision between them. Kale circled the table until he stood before her, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threads in his dark hair, the exhaustion and fear that he had been hiding from his men. "If you go," he said quietly, "I do not know if I can continue." Sera felt her heart constrict. She had not expected this. She had prepared arguments about strategy and necessity, about the greater good and the price of peace. She had not prepared for the raw vulnerability in his voice. "You continued for 36 months after Isolde died," she said gently. "You are stronger than you know." 36 months I did not live. I only existed, walking through the days, performing the duties of a king while feeling nothing. He reached out and took her hands in his, a gesture so intimate that it made her breath catch. "You changed that. You made me feel again. And now you ask me to watch you walk into danger and pretend that it does not terrify me." Sera looked down at their joined hands. His were large and scarred, the hands of a warrior who had spent decades defending his people. Hers were small and pale, marked only by the fading scars from the chains that had once bound her to death. "I am not asking you to pretend," she said. "I am asking you to let me do what I was made to do, to trust that the same goddess who brought us together will not tear us apart now." She looked up and met his eyes. "I will come back to you, Kale. Whatever happens in that court, whatever truths I have to face or reveal, I will find my way back. I promise." For a long moment, they stood there in silence. Then Kale released her hands and stepped back, his face settling into the mask of kingship that she had learned to recognize. 2 weeks, he said. "If I do not hear from you in 2 weeks, I am coming for you, and I will burn the Western Kingdom to ash to get you back." She nodded. 2 weeks. She did not tell him that she was afraid. She did not tell him that her gift had shown her glimpses of what waited in Valdric's court, fragments of truth that made her want to run in the opposite direction. She did not tell him that leaving him was the hardest thing she had ever chosen to do. Some truths were better left unspoken, even for a truth-seer. The journey to the Western Kingdom took 5 days. Sera traveled with a small escort, flying a white flag of parley that guaranteed her safe passage through the disputed territories. The road wound through mountain passes and fertile valleys, through villages that watched their procession with suspicious eyes, and towns that had already begun preparing for war. Everywhere she looked, she saw the cost of conflict. Fields left unharvested, children without fathers, women with the hollow expressions of those who had lost too much. The Western soldiers who met her at the border regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. They were hard men, veterans of campaigns she had never heard of, their faces scarred by battles and weather. They had heard stories about the truth-seer who had exposed corruption in the northern court. They did not know what to make of a woman who had volunteered to become their prisoner. One of them, a captain with a missing ear and a perpetual scowl, rode beside her for most of the journey. He said little, but she caught him watching her from the corner of his eye, as if expecting her to reveal some hidden truth about him at any moment. She said nothing. She had learned that silence was often more powerful than speech. The western capital was larger than Kael's fortress, sprawling across a wide valley with towers of white stone that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight like beacons calling travelers home. It was beautiful in a way that the northern mountains were not, all graceful curves and elegant architecture designed to impress rather than defend. Where Kael's fortress spoke of strength and endurance, this palace whispered of refinement and culture. Gardens surrounded the central buildings, filled with flowers that bloomed in the warming spring weather, tended by an army of gardeners who moved among the beds like ghosts. But Sera could feel the rot beneath the beauty, the corruption hidden behind the polished marble facades. Her gift stirred uneasily as they passed through the gates, sensing the lies and secrets that festered in every shadow, in every whispered conversation, in every averted gaze. This was a court built on deception, maintained by fear, and ruled by a man who trusted no one because he knew how easily trust could be betrayed. They brought her to the throne room, a vast space of polished marble and soaring columns. King Valdric sat upon a throne of carved ivory, watching her approach with eyes that missed nothing. He was 50 years old, gray at the temples but still strong, with the bearing of a man who had spent his life commanding others. "So," he said, "the famous truth-seer. You are smaller than I expected." Sera stopped at the appropriate distance and did not bow. "Truth does not require size," she said, "only the willingness to see and to speak." Valdric's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "Bold. I appreciate boldness. It is so rare in my court." He rose from his throne and descended the steps to stand before her. Up close, she could see the deep lines carved into his face by years of difficult decisions. She could also see what her gift revealed beneath the surface, a man consumed by fear, fear of betrayal, fear of weakness, fear of the inevitable decline that came with age. "You came willingly," he said. "Why?" "Because war is a waste of lives that could be spent on better things. And because I believe that truth can prevent more bloodshed than any sword." A pretty sentiment. Valdric began to circle her slowly. "But I have seen what truth can do. I have seen it destroy families, topple kingdoms, end lives. Truth is not a gift. It is a weapon. And weapons belong to those with the strength to wield them." Sera held her ground. Truth belongs to itself. It cannot be owned or controlled. Those who try to possess it are always destroyed by it in the end. Valdric stopped in front of her, his eyes narrowing. "Is that a threat?" "It is an observation. You fear being deceived, so you seek to control a truth-seer. But the truth I show you may not be the truth you want to see, and then you will have to choose. Accept what is real, or destroy the messenger who revealed it." Something flickered in the king's eyes, recognition perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "You will be given comfortable quarters," he said finally. "You will be treated as a guest, not a prisoner. But you will not leave the palace grounds, and you will be watched at all times. Those are my terms." Sera nodded. "I accept." The days that followed were a careful dance of observation and manipulation. Sera was given chambers in the eastern wing of the palace, rooms that were luxurious but also isolated from the main corridors of power. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting scenes of Western victories, battles won and enemies conquered. The bed was soft, the food was plentiful, and the windows offered a beautiful view of the palace gardens below. It was a gilded cage, comfortable enough to lull a prisoner into complacency. Guards stood outside her door at all hours, their presence a constant reminder that she was not free to leave. Servants came and went with meals and fresh linens, their eyes carefully averted, their ears no doubt attuned to every word she might speak. Everything she did, every conversation she had, every visitor she received was reported directly to the king. She was watched constantly. But watching was something she could do too. In fact, it was what she had been born to do. She attended court functions, standing quietly in the corners while nobles conducted their business. She listened to their conversations, observed their interactions, and let her gift show her the truths they worked so hard to hide. Within a week, she knew more about the corruption in Valdric's court than he himself suspected. She also identified her allies. Princess Elira came to visit her on the third day. The king's daughter was 22 years old, dark-haired and intelligent, with eyes that held a sadness that seemed out of place in one so young. "I wanted to meet you," Elira said, settling into a chair. "Everyone speaks of the truth-seer from the north. They say you can look at a person and know all their secrets." "That is not quite how it works," Sera said carefully. "I see lies and truths, yes, but I cannot read minds. I can only perceive when someone's words do not match their reality." Elira nodded slowly. "And what do you perceive about me?" Sera was quiet for a moment, letting her gift examine the young woman before her. "I perceive someone who loves her father, but fears what he has become. Someone who believes in peace, but feels powerless to achieve it. Someone who dreams of a different kind of leadership, but does not know how to reach for it." Tears welled in Elira's eyes. "My father was not always like this," she said quietly. "When I was a child, he laughed. He played with me in the gardens. But then my mother died, and something changed in him. He became afraid afraid of losing power, afraid of being betrayed. Sera leaned forward. Fear makes people do terrible things, but it does not have to be permanent. People can change if they are shown a different path. Can you help him? Can you show him what he has become? I do not know, Sera admitted, but I can try. If you help me. General Thorne was a harder case. He was 55 years old, a career soldier who had served 3 kings and fought in more battles than he could count. His loyalty to Valdric was legendary, but he was also deeply troubled by the war his king had ordered. Sera arranged to encounter him in the palace gardens on the 5th day. He regarded her with wary respect. "Truth seer," he said by way of greeting, "I am surprised you are not locked in a tower somewhere." "Your king prefers to keep his weapons close at hand," Sera replied, "even the ones he does not fully understand." "You think you are a weapon?" "I think everyone is a weapon of some kind. The question is what we choose to fight for." They walked in silence for a moment. "You served the king's father," Sera said. "I have heard he was a different kind of ruler." "He was." Thorne's voice softened. Stern but fair. He believed that a king's duty was to protect his people, not to expand his territory. He would never have started this war. "Then why do you follow his son into one?" "Because I swore an oath. Because loyalty means something, even when the person you serve has lost their way." Sera met his eyes. There are different kinds of loyalty. Loyalty to a person, loyalty to a kingdom, loyalty to what is right. Sometimes those loyalties align, sometimes they conflict. A wise man knows which one to follow when they do not. Thorne studied her for a long moment. "You are trying to turn me against my king. I am trying to save lives, yours included. This war will destroy everything your kingdom has built, and for what? The pride of a man too afraid to admit he is wrong." She could see the conflict in his eyes, the soldier's training warring with the man's conscience. "I cannot betray my oath," he said finally, "but I can question the orders I am given, and I can listen when someone speaks sense." It was not a commitment, but it was a start. On the 8th night, Draven found her. She was alone in her chambers, preparing for sleep, when the door opened without warning. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, dressed in the fine clothes of a Western courtier, but still carrying himself with the predatory grace of an alpha. Her first instinct was to scream. Her second was to use her gift to strike at him. But something in his face stopped her, something she had not expected to see. "Pain. I did not come to hurt you," he said, closing the door behind him. "I came to talk." "We have nothing to talk about. You tried to kill me. You are the reason this war is happening." Draven moved to the window. "I did all those things," he said quietly. "I am not here to deny them. I am here to explain why." "I do not care why." "Yes, you do." He turned to face her. "You are a truth seer. Understanding why people do what they do is the foundation of your gift. You cannot resist knowing." Sera hated that he was right. "Fine," she said, "explain." Draven sat in the chair across from her. "You know about my father," he began. "You know that a truth seer condemned him to death. What you do not know is the whole story." He paused. "My father was not a good man. I will not pretend otherwise. He was harsh and ambitious. But the crimes he was accused of, the crimes that led to his execution, he did not commit all of them." Sera frowned. "What do you mean?" "The truth seer who testified against him was named Mora. She had loved a man my father killed. Her accusation was driven by vengeance as much as justice. And when she used her gift to reveal his sins, she saw what she expected to see. What she wanted to see." Draven leaned forward. She was not lying exactly. She believed what she said. But truth is not always simple. It depends on perspective, on interpretation. "My father was guilty of many things, but he was innocent of some of the specific crimes she accused him of, and those crimes were the ones that warranted death." He looked at Sera with something that might have been pleading. "I know you think you see clearly. I know you believe your gift shows you the absolute truth. But what if you are wrong? What if the things you see are colored by your own fears? What if the judgments you make destroy innocent people?" Sera was silent. The questions he raised were ones she had asked herself. Questions that had troubled her since Ravenna had explained the true nature of her power. "I know my gift is not perfect," she said finally. "I know that interpretation matters. That is why I have tried to use it carefully. But you cannot always confirm." Draven shook his head. "Sometimes you have to act on what you see, and you will never know if you were right or wrong. That uncertainty is the curse of being a truth seer." He stood and moved toward the door. "I am not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I am asking you to understand why I became what I am, and I am asking you to consider whether the path you are on will lead you to the same darkness." He paused with his hand on the door. "If you want to stop this war, you will have to show Valdric something that changes him, something that breaks through the fear that drives him. But be careful what you reveal. Truth can heal. It can also destroy. And once spoken, it can never be taken back." Then he was gone, leaving Sera alone with her thoughts. On the 10th day, Valdric discovered her plans. She did not know who had betrayed her. Perhaps one of the servants had overheard her conversation with Elira. Perhaps Valdric had simply been watching more closely than she realized. Guards burst into her chambers at dawn, seized her without explanation, and dragged her to a dungeon beneath the palace. "You have been plotting against me," Valdric said when he came to see her. His face was twisted with rage. "You are not a guest. You are a spy." "I am someone who wants to prevent a war," Sera said from behind the iron bars. "Everything I have done has been aimed at that goal. By undermining my authority, by turning my own people against me, by showing them the truth, that this war is unnecessary, that thousands will die for nothing but your pride and your fear." Valdric's face went pale, then red. "How dare you speak to me of fear? I am a king. I am not afraid of anything." Sera looked at him, and for the first time since arriving, she let her gift fully open. She let herself see not just the surface lies, but the deep truths buried beneath years of denial. "You are afraid of everything," she said quietly. "You are afraid of being betrayed like your father was, afraid of losing your throne to ambitious nobles, afraid that your daughter does not respect you, afraid that when you die, no one will remember you as anything but a tyrant." Silence. Valdric stared at her as if she had struck him. "You started this war not because you wanted territory," she continued, her voice gentle now, "but because you were afraid. Afraid that the northern kingdom was growing stronger while yours grew weaker. Afraid of your own mortality and the legacy you will leave behind." "Stop!" Valdric's voice was barely a whisper. "I cannot stop. This is what I am. But I can choose what truths to reveal. And today, I choose to show you not just your fears, but the thing that can free you from them." She closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, to the power that Ravenna had taught her to wield. She felt the truth stone in her pocket grow warm against her skin. Then she let the truth flow outward. It was not like anything she had done before. This was not revealing a single lie. This was opening a window into her own soul and letting everyone in the dungeon see what was inside. They saw her as a child, beaten for speaking truths no one wanted to hear. They saw her mother dying while her father refused to listen. They saw the years of hunger and isolation. They saw the pillar and the chains and the blizzard that should have killed her. They saw her being rescued by a king who had nothing to gain. They saw her learning to trust again, slowly and painfully. They saw her choosing to come here, to walk into the enemy's court, because she believed that truth could save more lives than swords. And then she turned the vision outward, and they saw themselves. Valdric saw his own fear reflected back at him, ugly and undeniable. He saw how that fear had twisted his judgment, corrupted his relationships, and driven him to start a war. He saw his daughter's love for him, buried beneath years of disappointment. He saw the man he had been before grief and paranoia had consumed him. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Father." Elira's voice cut through the silence. She had followed the guards to the dungeon, had witnessed everything. Now she ran to her father and wrapped her arms around him. "I am sorry," Valdric gasped. "I am so sorry. I did not know. I did not see." "You see now," Sera said softly. "That is all that matters." General Thorne stood at the entrance to the dungeon, his face wet with tears of his own. He looked at Sera with wonder. "What do we do now?" he asked. Valdric raised his head. His face was ravaged by emotion, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. "We end this," he said. "We end this war before it destroys us all." The peace treaty was signed 3 days later. Sera did not attend the formal ceremony. She was too exhausted, her strength depleted by the magnitude of what she had done. She lay in her bed in the eastern wing, no longer a prisoner, but not yet strong enough to leave, while history was made without her. Kale came to her on the 4th day. She heard the commotion outside her door, the guards arguing with someone who would not be turned away. Then the door burst open and he was there, filling the doorway with his presence, his golden eyes scanning the room until they found her. "Sera," he breathed. She tried to sit up and failed. He crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered her into his arms, holding her against his chest, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "You came," she whispered. "Did you think I would not?" He pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands cupping her cheeks. "I would have come the moment I heard. I would have torn down these walls to reach you. I told you I would find my way back. You did more than that." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You ended a war. You changed a king. You saved thousands of lives." She smiled weakly. "I just showed them the truth. They did the rest themselves." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet room while the world outside sorted itself into new patterns. The war was over. The peace was real. And somehow, against all odds, they had both survived. 1 year later, they stood together in the great hall of the northern fortress, exchanging vows before their assembled people. It was not a ceremony of fated mates or magical bonds. It was simply two people who had chosen each other, who had proven their love through separation and danger and the hard work of building trust. The witnesses who filled the hall were not just nobles and officials, but common people too, farmers and soldiers and servants who had come to love the truth-seer queen who treated them with kindness and honesty. Lord Brennan, frail but determined, had insisted on attending the ceremony despite his failing health. He sat in a place of honor, his eyes bright with tears, as he watched the king he had served for 20 years finally find happiness again. It would be his last public appearance. 6 months later, he would pass peacefully in his sleep, having lived long enough to see the kingdom he loved secured by bonds of love rather than war. Sera wore a gown of white and silver, simple but elegant. Kael wore the formal robes of kingship, but his eyes never left her face. When the moment came for him to speak his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I take you as my wife, my partner, my queen. Not because fate decreed it, but because I choose you. Today and every day that follows, in truth and in love." Sera felt tears slip down her cheeks as she spoke her own vows. "I take you as my husband, my partner, my king. Not because I had no other choice, but because among all the choices in the world, you are the one I want. Today and every day that follows, in truth and in love." The celebration lasted 3 days. There was feasting and dancing, and more joy than the fortress had seen in years. But eventually the guests departed, and Kael and Sera were left alone to begin their life together. The year that followed was one of building and healing. They established the Academy of Truth, a place where those with gifts like Sera's could learn to control and use their abilities safely. Young pathfinders and truth-seers came from across the kingdoms, drawn by the promise of training and protection. Ravenna herself came to serve as the Academy's first teacher, her ancient wisdom a foundation on which new traditions could be built. They also reformed the laws of the Northern Kingdom. No longer could someone be condemned to death on the word of a truth-seer alone. Evidence was required, witnesses, proof that could be examined and questioned. Truth was still honored, but it was no longer treated as infallible. Princess Elira became a frequent visitor, her friendship with Sera deepening into something like sisterhood. The Western Kingdom flourished under her guidance as her father, humbled and changed by his experience, gradually transferred power to her capable hands. The alliance between the two kingdoms held strong, built not on fear, but on genuine respect. Of Draven, there was no word. He had vanished after the peace treaty was signed, disappearing into the wilderness with only a handful of followers who still believed in his cause. Some said he had died in the mountains, claimed by the same cold that had nearly killed Sera on that fateful night. Others claimed to have seen him in distant lands, a wanderer without a home or a cause, seeking redemption or revenge in equal measure. Sera sometimes wondered about him, about whether he had found any peace with the demons that drove him. She suspected he had not. Some wounds were too deep for healing, some paths too far down to return from. Perhaps one day their paths would cross again, perhaps not. Either way, she had made her peace with it. But she did not dwell on it. There were too many other things that needed her attention. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Sera found Kael standing on the northern tower, looking out over the mountains, as he had done every night for years. But his posture was different now. There was no grief in the set of his shoulders, no longing for death in the way he held himself against the wind. She came to stand beside him, and he put his arm around her without looking away from the view. "I used to come here to wait for an ending," he said quietly. "Now I come here to appreciate the beginning." Sera leaned into his warmth. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me instead of a wife who could give you children?" He was silent for a moment. Then he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." He led her down from the tower and through the corridors of the fortress, past the great hall and the council chambers, to a courtyard she had not visited before. It was filled with children. A dozen of them, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to 15, were training with wooden swords under the watchful eye of Bran. They laughed and shouted as they sparred, their faces bright with exertion and joy. "Orphans," Cale said, "from the borderlands, from disbanded packs, from villages destroyed by the conflicts we have ended." He squeezed her hands. "They needed a home. We had one to offer." Sera felt tears well in her eyes. "You never told me." "I wanted it to be a surprise." He smiled, and in that smile she saw the man he had been before grief had broken him, the man he had become again. "Lord Brennan said something to me before he passed. He said that legacy is not about blood. It is about what we leave behind in the world, peace and justice and hope." He looked at the children. "And love. We may not have children of our own, Sera, but we have them, and we have each other, and I have never felt richer in my life." Sera threw her arms around him and held on tight. She thought about the girl she had been, chained to a pillar in a blizzard, waiting to die. She thought about all the years of loneliness and fear, all the times she had been told she was worthless, all the moments she had believed them. And she thought about now, about the warmth of his arms around her, about the children laughing in the courtyard, about the kingdom that had accepted her, the academy she had built, the lives she had changed. "When I was on that pillar," she said into his chest, "I thought I would die as someone who had never mattered, someone who had never been chosen." He pulled back to look at her face, his golden eyes soft with love. "You are chosen, Sera, by me, every single day." She smiled through her tears. "And you are chosen by me, every single day." They stood there in the fading light, watching the children play, listening to their laughter echo off the ancient stones. The world was not perfect. There would be more challenges, more conflicts, more truths that needed to be revealed. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. And that was enough. Above them, the first stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched over Sera on the worst night of her life. But tonight they seemed brighter somehow, more hopeful. Tonight they looked like a blessing. And somewhere in the mountains, where the wind still howled and the snow still fell, an empty pillar stood silent and alone, its chains long since shattered, its purpose long since fulfilled. The goddess had spoken through the storm that night, and 2 broken souls had answered her call. The rest, as they say, was history. End of Part 3. The end.